ESP, the extrasensory perception, this idea that we can either communicate through our mind, we can communicate through our energy, we can impact the material world, we can bend spoons, we can see through walls. Maybe our perception is extrasensory, that we're not limited to just what our eyes can physically see. We can actually see not only what's on the other side of that wall, but we can see what's on the other side of the river. We can, in a moment of focus, we can see what's happening in a room on the next continent. We can focus our energies. We can direct what's happening in front of us. So through the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, and this is a very interesting thing for you to Google. There's a piece that The Guardian wrote on it, which is very interesting. You can Google this and read some really cool long form pieces about it. But through the 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, if you remember, Russia, Soviet Union, and the United States were in a Cold War. And each of these countries, independently and sometimes collaboratively via connections at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur in California. Both of these entities funneled huge amounts of government funds and resources into experimentation.
Right there.
On ESP.
Yes, so
on the powers
one of the first things Schliemann does, as any visitor to Mycenae does, in fact, it's the only way you can get into the site because that was the way the fortress was designed. There is a little postern gate back here that you can't see from outside the walls, so if everything went south, you could escape the citadel through a little door here, leading away. But the only entrance into this place was through this one gate. And if you notice the sheer height of the walls, the battlements around it, if you are trying to take Mycenae, right, getting over the walls, which would be well defended, would be extremely difficult given the slope of the hill. So if you're going in one way, you are in what we might as well just call like a kill zone right here, right? You're exposed to fire from the tops in 3 directions. Right. This architecture is designed to protect the entrance.
Then we want to spend a little time talking about Latin America, but specifically Mexico. The president of Mexico, Manuel Lopez Obrador. This is really interesting. So he calls a referendum against himself, right? He calls a recall on himself. Mexicans kind of yawn. He wins, and now he says, I have a mandate to do what? It's a one-term presidency, right? You get one term, 6 years, no matter what. He's got to leave. Halfway through, he says, I want a recall referendum on me. Okay, there's nothing in the Mexican Constitution that would have allowed him to be removed from office anyway. But he does it, he says, I want the people to tell me whether you think I'm doing a good job. Okay, so they had the referendum. Well, I'll get into this. It's kind of an interesting thing. But now that he's won, he says, I have a mandate. And the people say, you have to do what?
You have to.
So we'll see.
This was written early on as a solo for Elphaba, and then they added other bits and pieces of the show in. Stephen Schwartz, like Lin-Manuel Miranda, like Les Mis showed us how, will take motifs from different songs and add them in and layer them to songs like this. And this is the moment when Elphaba takes a moral stand. This is when she decides that she's not going to go along with the wizard and she's going to become a rebel. She invites Glinda to go, but Glinda wants to be popular, so Glinda says no. But we see this wonderful relationship between these two girls who initially hated each other. And it was Idina Menzel's idea to sing up the octave when she starts to fly. And, once again, this has lots of special effects in it, but they're not wild and crazy like Spider-Man. Basically what happens is they distract you by having Glinda do something and Elphaba steps onto a platform and this thing attaches around her waist so that she doesn't fall off when she starts to fly. And no one ever did, so that's a good thing. Nobody fell off. So here is Defying Gravity.
Don't be afraid. I'm not. It's the wizard who should be afraid of me. Something has changed within me. Something is not the same. I'm through with playing by the rules of someone else's game.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. She knows where the handkerchief is, and she knows why it's gone. But the handkerchief itself is I think quite interesting. First of all, Othello is explaining that it is magical, and that it was given to his mother essentially by a witch who told her that, or given to her his father, who gave it to the mother and said that if she ever lost it, then that would create an evil spell, and the father would. And so she gave it to Othello when she died and said, you give it to your wife, and so you never lose it. It's a magical handkerchief. And in the play, in the first act, Othello is accused by Desdemona's father of witchcraft. He cannot believe that she would have fallen for this guy unless he practiced some kind of witchcraft. And since he is a Moor, he's from Africa, then obviously. But of course, he says, well, the only witchcraft I practiced on her was telling her my life story and falling in love with her, and that means that's witchcraft. And he is presented in the play as a Christian who is fighting against the Muslims who are attacking Cyprus. And yet the story of the handkerchief seems to suggest that he really does believe in witchcraft after all. It's kind
So the Astors own the house until the beginning of the Second World War. And for various reasons, in 1942, they gave the house, they gave Clifton to the National Trust with the proviso that the family could continue to live in the house for as long as they wished. It's hard to believe that the trust agreed to that, but they did. Should they cease to do so, they expressed the wish that the house be used, quote, for promoting friendship and understanding between the peoples of the United States and Canada and the other dominions. And they also gave the trust, and why the trust accepted it, is the largest endowment that the trust had ever received.
The Nazis brought violence onto the political scene, fighting and often brutally terrorizing and killing their greatest rivals, the communists, but then claiming that they were defending themselves against the communists. But they brought something else to politics. Even their supposedly legal and constitutional representatives, the Nazi deputies in state parliaments and in the Reichstag, made a point of conducting themselves as badly as possible. Brawls involving Nazi deputies were common. Indeed, Nazi parliamentarians made a point of violating every principle of parliamentary courtesy. During a Reichstag debate in May of 1932, a Nazi deputy interrupted a communist speech by yelling out, "Your stupidity is priceless and intolerable." The presiding officer called the deputy to order. And the Communist caucus leader then shouted back, "Hold your trap." To which the Nazi then replied, "We're sending you to Russia to die." In early 1932, in the Reichstag, Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister for the Nazis once they took power, caused outrage by referring to the Social Democrats as, quote, the party of deserters.
And
deputies
it's
from all
because she's doing it for him and with him for a dinner together at home, so to speak. But he's got nothing but bad news, and she will eventually sense it, though for a long time she's just so happy that she doesn't.
I want to be too cold out here. Maybe we should eat inside. Huh? Something like this.
Machinery that is required to make new virus, right? So when a virus infects your cells, it kind of takes over your normal functioning in the cell, and it stops production of proteins for the cell and makes the cell only make viral proteins, right? So it takes over. It's like a hostile takeover, right? The virus comes in, says, okay, the human factory is closed, and now we're gonna make viral proteins. Those viral proteins are also being displayed on those HLA complexes. And the white blood cells will recognize those as, oh, that's not human, that's viral. Destroy that cell. Right? And the idea is that if you destroy the cell that is producing virus, then you're kind of containing the infection, right? Because if you don't, then the viruses will leave that cell and then infect neighboring cells, right? So the white blood cell has that task. Identify cells that are problematic and kill them, right? White blood cells also recognize tumor cells, for example, right? So anything that deviates from what is pegged as, this is what I normally encounter. All of a sudden, there's this thing, this protein that doesn't look right? The signature, the chemical signature on my billboard has changed, right? I do not recognize that as self. I must destroy it, right? That's what the white blood cell is looking at. And so this is
since 1999, 14 new members joined NATO. And until recently, until Sunday, I would say, it was Putin's agenda to say, you broke your promise, and this is why we want to stop you. You cannot expand NATO further east. So you see in yellow current aspirations to join. I think this is way too early. No one in the West really wanted to risk further confrontation, which happened anyway, with Russia. And so this was really way up in the air if they ever join. And but it was enough, obviously, for Putin to draw the red line. I don't know what his agenda is now, because it changed since Sunday. But for the last 3 months, it was always, I want to have, and you might remember this famous paper, which was submitted in Geneva. I want to guarantee that Ukraine will never join NATO. So that's a conflict, because people have the sovereignty and they have the right to join, the right to choose whoever they want to, whatever they want to join. On the other hand, people in the West, including me, said, we understand that it's of concern to Russia, who might feel encircled. And it's not if this is really happening. The perception is sometimes as the perception of a danger is as powerful as the real danger.
And there's been an awful lot of talk about presidential figures post-Trump, and more comment, including some from me, that Ron DeSantis in Florida looks like maybe a good post-Trump Republican. But now we need to keep our eye on Brian Kemp. I mean, the size of his margin, 77-22 over a credible candidate backed by Trump, means that this guy might be a real national player. He will be term limited, so he can't run for governor again in 2026. But that means he'll be free to run for president in 2028, particularly if the Democrats hold the White House in 2024.
The Great Depression was a worldwide catastrophe, and the Dust Bowl, it encompassed a wide swath of American land. But there is a but in here. There is a lot more to the 1930s than depression, than atrocity. Those things are there, absolutely, and we are going to talk about them. But one of the things that I really invested in this semester is spending time too on the humor that you can find in the American 1930s, and a little British, on the beauty that you can find, on the resilience that is there And I think that opening with the John Ford Grapes of Wrath movie is a really nice way to get introduced to both of those sides. Because in the 1930s,
10th century, Hebron was a major pilgrimage site for all three religions. And there was a new custom, which I thought was so fascinating, you should know about. It's a wonderful thing. And it's called the Table of Abraham, Friend of God. So the way you say friend of God is Al-Halil. And this custom was instituted by the Muslims. This is supposedly the cenotaph or the memorial right next to Abraham's tomb. In Hebron, this is from 985. At the top. In Hebron is a public guest house continuously open with a cook, a baker, and servants in regular attendance. And these offer a dish of lentils and olive oil to every poor person who arrives. But that must be hummus. And it is set before the rich too, should they wish to partake. And that is the words of a Muslim geographer. Everyone gets it if they come. And then in 1047, we see the same thing going on. They grow at Hebron olives in abundance. The visitors are given bread and olives. The loaves are about 3 pounds, and to every person who arrives, they give daily a loaf of bread and a dish of lentils cooked in olive oil, also some raisins. And there are some days when as many as 500 pilgrims arrive, to each of whom this hospitality is offered. Because it was known that Abraham was hospitable from biblical times, the value of hospitality became not only a value in the Jewish religion, also in the Christian religion later, but where celebrating together at a feast was considered to be the highest form of celebration. And then later among the Muslims, as you can see, they also wanted to be to everyone to feel that they had found a friend when they came to the city of Abraham.
That's a good question. So eventually, Reagan ends up winning in Texas by a healthy margin, about 140,000 votes. He doesn't win the nomination, of course, but the die has been cast. Texas is now much more conservative than it was, and you've got a lot more potential prospects for the Republicans to seek out. I don't think it helped Ford that he, when he went to San Antonio, tried to eat a tamale with the husk on, which you all know, of course, is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to take it off and eat it, but this was not, I guess, good staff work on behalf of the White House. Ford bites into it, makes a mess. He looks kind of a fool. So I don't think that mattered that much, but that was when that happened. So you can see potentially it's the case that Ford may have also hurt his own case. Well,
the big thing that I wanted everyone to take away from 2 weeks ago, actually a couple of things. Everybody is a natural storyteller, and we talked about the reason. The idea is that when we tell stories, we create symbols, words, gestures, postures in order to create meaning out of the world. And without stories, we can't create meaning very easily at all. As a matter of fact, creation, expression, and effective communication are the 3 phases in meaning. They're the 3 phases. Unless you create an image in your mind, you're not going to find a way to express it. And if you can't express it, then ultimately there's not going to be any kind of congruency. You're not going to understand what I mean. That's one thing. Also, we understand that every story, even though we're all storytellers, every story is a little bit different, but you need 3 essentials in every story. It doesn't mean that if you have these 3 things, your story is going to be flawless, but without these, you don't have a story.
So Faisal, as a result of this, is widely respected in the Arab world. He's modernized Saudi Arabia. He's opposed Zionism. He's increased oil prices. In 1965, as part of his modernization, he started the first television station in Saudi Arabia. This created riots in the streets by the Wahhabis. Why? Anybody? There's pictures of people. Pictures of people. You got a television set, it's got a picture of a person on it. That's idols, that's idolatry. So the Wahhabis were violently against it.
Good morning and welcome to Masters and Masterpieces. Our art history webinar today will be taking us into the very heart of the 17th century in the Netherlands. So we'll be exploring the very enigmatic, very mysterious art of Jan Vermeer, an artist who is in the heart of that 17th century, that Baroque century. So generally speaking, the 17th century is known as a century of dramatic art, full of motion, full of emotions. We get to see today why and how Jan Vermeer is considered the last of the old masters and or the first of the modern masters.
Subject. Well, today's subject of asking this question is pertinent because pretty much everybody that I've heard from over the last couple of years have said that, yes, aren't these the worst of times? And you can't deny that they've been terrible times with the storming of the Capitol, with the pandemic, with wars in Afghanistan and Ukraine, and many more things that we could mention. But, spoiler alert, the answer to today's question is no, that these are not the worst of times. Now, I'm not going to try to convince you that these are the best of times or that they are even good times, just that our country has gone through much worse in the past. And this is the key point I hope to persuade you of today. We surmounted those very bad times and we went on to be a better country.
So I'm going to stop, Bruce, because it's a song that doesn't have a repeat in it, but we've gone deep enough into the song to get beyond the refrain, because the refrain is what I think stuck for the American people. Born in the USA. And the song comes out in the middle of the 1980s, and we're in high patriotism, high forget about the 1970s, high forget about Vietnam, forget about all of that. And it felt like such a patriotic song. It's all about being born in the USA and being proud of being born in the USA. That's what the song feels like if you just pay attention to the refrain. But if you pay attention to the story that is between the refrain, it's a more complicated song, but I still don't think it's not a patriotic song. I think it is a more nuanced song that is telling the story. So if we listen to the whole of the lyrics, he gets into a jam, a little hometown jam. And because the person being narrated in the song is working class and doesn't have the resources to get out of his little hometown jam, when he goes to court to deal with his hometown jam, he's given the option of so many days in jail, or you can go get a haircut and go off to fight, in the words of the song, the yellow man in a foreign land.
Okay. He now averages about 11%, which is well behind his nemesis, or one of his nemesis. Everybody is his nemesis, okay? But the most important nemesis, namely Marine Le Pen, okay, who seems to have more or less climbed a little bit and is now hovering at about 17% of the vote. She's in second place to Macron. And so during his speech, and this is remarkable, many of his supporters, and you can listen to videos of this, began to chant Macron assassin. Macron the assassin. Now, it's not quite clear what they meant by that. Okay, who did he assassinate? What act of premeditated murder was he engaged in? Okay.
Now, Sondheim likes to talk about a ballad that Fosca sings when dictating a letter to Giorgio. So she is sick and in bed and has Giorgio come over and she dictates a letter to him. But that letter happens to be from Giorgio to her, and she's dictating it. It's very weird. She's very obsessed, and her love is not pure in any stretch of the imagination. But he worked on it for like 8 to 12 hours a day, starting with stream of consciousness, feeling out the overall musical and lyrical patterns. Sondheim said, I always describe it as one long rhapsody. It's all about the yearning between two people. So it's really kind of the linchpin in the show itself when you have Fosca basically declaring her love for Giorgio within this letter.